Hello, 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 and welcome back to January's PD Reimagined. We're so happy to have you. We're doing things a little differently. So we have some new people for one. So we wanted to welcome everyone who is new. So we have a few new faces. Please say hi.
Right.
Do introduce yourself in the chat if you can, and how you're feeling maybe. And if you can, just put yourself on mute. That would be super helpful. We also are testing the new approach of telling you who our guests are. So Sam Harris and Annaka Harris are here with us today. And for the first time ever, we've told you guys who we're having. So we're not going to make you guess. And we would love to know how you guys like that. So Andy, I don't know if we have that poll ready, but let's ask people how they feel about knowing who the guests are.
You want to know which one?
So do you prefer knowing who the speakers are before the summit? Yes or no? And then the second question actually is something that came up. A lot of people asked, they like the fact that, we have a lot of consumables, but I was curious if that was something that other people like too. Do you like having consumables in the box? Yes or no? All right, those are rolling in. Okay, we've got, maybe I'll wait for a few more. If you guys can just answer those, maybe we'll end the poll there. All right, we've got 30 people. There you go. That's good. So we've got 73% of you said yes, you like knowing, and 27% said no. I'm assuming that would be because you like the anticipation. And then do you like having more consumables? And that's a pretty clear yes. So that's great. Good to know. So the next piece of this is I just wanted to give a reminder to everybody that we have and next month's summit will be February 15th. It's usually on Thursday, but this time it's going to be on a Wednesday. I'm traveling, so apologies for that. We are changing that up. The last thing, is that we are going to have more in-person events. We had our first kickoff with Austin, and it was fabulous. It was a really, really great night. I think you guys also saw the recap video. We will be resending that and seeing where you want us to go next. So do let us know. So what to expect for those new people, this is the general format. You've had the inspiration boxes, usually that will tell you who the guests are or hint at who the guests are. Then we do these summits. And the first 5 minutes is me talking. I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible because we have such amazing guests today. And then we're going to have time with Annaka and Sam for about, call it 30 to 40, maybe 45 minutes. Some of that time will be Q&A. So as you guys have a chance to think about questions, you've been given access to Waking Up app. So you've hopefully know a little bit about them. And if you guys can think of any questions, if you want to share them in the chat, that would be great. Otherwise, we will have time for you to ask your questions in person at the end too. Then we're going to say goodbye to our guests. We're going to head into breakouts and share in a collaborative process. What's the big aha moment you had? And then collectively, we're going to come up with at least one strategy that you can try. And then we'll share that back on Padlet. So obviously the sharing is good both for you and also the community at large, because we often have different perspectives, and something that might be a light bulb moment for you might also be a light bulb moment for somebody else. We have Garth Brooks tickets as promised. So do make sure that you send in your commitments and opt in if you are a fan of Garth Brooks, because we're giving away 2 tickets to his Vegas residency. So that will be in the commitments this time. So last time we talked about holding on when 8 seconds seems impossible with Randy Bernard. We explored how holding on actually requires a lot more than just physical strength. Obviously, there's the emotional, mental, and the spiritual states that also influence those outcomes. The role that fear has and how it can actually help us, and how to optimize refuels. And he talked about how PhDs, meaning passion, hunger, and drive, are so important. This month, we're going to switch gears and really talk about mindfulness in a mindful world. I know we all feel a little chaotic at times, and we feel like there's so much on our plates that the concept of mindfulness is a little bit intimidating. So for the first time ever, we've shared who our guests are, so you can do a little research beforehand. But they've basically spent their entire careers thinking about consciousness and thinking about mindfulness and the brain and how it really works. So who better to ask these questions about mindfulness and what it really means, why it's important and how to achieve it than Annaka and Sam. Hopefully you've had a chance to already get to know them. Annaka is the author of the New York Times bestseller Conscious, a brief guide to the fundamental mystery of the mind, and also the children's book I Wonder. She actually was an editor. She was editing all of Sam's work, and then was so great that he said, okay, you have to do this professionally for other people as well. So I'm sure there's not that many editors that understand the material as well, probably as you do. And I can say, having been to dinner with both of you, that you definitely break it down so that even someone like me, who's definitely not in this world, can understand it. So I appreciate that. Sam, you're a neuroscientist, a philosopher, New York Times bestseller, author, host of the Making Sense podcast, and creator of the Waking Up app. You are also, I don't know if are you a co-host, or what do you call Absolutely Mental with Ricky Gervais? Is that also a co-creator or something like that?
Yeah, it's just the two of us. So
it's brilliant.
I don't know what we are. We're a lot of laughs. He's the funny one.
Yeah, no, you're both actually very funny, which is your Making Sense podcast has the very sort of serious music to it, and then Absolutely Mental shows this very comedic side. It's a nice yin and yang. We always share a quote. So this time, actually, I'd already shared a quote by Annaka in our newsletter, but this quote came from Sam. It was, almost all of our suffering is the product of our thoughts. We spend nearly every moment of our lives, lost in thought, hostage to the character of those thoughts. You can break this spell, but it takes training, just like it takes training to defend yourself against a physical assault. So very thought-provoking there, that we're all walking around kind of like zombies, sometimes lost in thought. And I'm absolutely guilty of that. So welcome, Sam and Annaka.
Yeah. Thanks, Nadine. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess the first question I have for you guys is, what is mindfulness to you? Okay, maybe you can both.
Yeah,
you can both
should pitch
answer
it to one of us. So
yeah, you can.
Unless you want to see a husband and wife fighting for the ball.
You go, Sam. You go ahead. I'm trying to fix something.
Well, mindfulness, there are a couple of levels to the practice, I would say, but in the most basic sense, it's a non-judgmental, non-reactive, curious, open attention to whatever is arising in your experience. So it's, it in principle encompasses anything you could possibly notice. So as a practice, it doesn't exclude any part of experience. So you can be mindful of emotions and moods and sensations and even thoughts, although in the beginning, thoughts seem like in principle, an enemy to the practice of mindfulness because we're so distractible by them. But ultimately, mindfulness is just noticing what you notice without grasping at what's pleasant or pushing what's unpleasant away. So it's the crucial piece is that you're not lost in thought and you're not reacting to pleasant and unpleasant. You want a mind that's just open like the sky, letting everything appear and disappear within it. And that's it's easier said than done. It's a very simple practice, but as I said, we're very distractible. But you can hear in the description of what this state of attention is, the possibility for real relief of suffering, because it's the non-reactive piece that is such a relief. You're just not clinging to impermanent experiences that you are afraid to lose, and you're not pushing or contracting around negative experiences that are arising on their own and that you can't control, whether it's physical pain or unpleasant thoughts or whatever it is. And it's in that non-reaction that you really feel the ordinary clenched fist of the mind, fully release. And it's quite wonderful.
Does that take a certain detachment then? Is that kind of what that is? So you're not emoting and clinging on to every moment? Is it sort of that distance, that objective detachment?
Yeah, but it's not a matter of suppressing emotion or avoiding emotion. It really is. If you take an emotion like anxiety, say, or anger, and then you want to become mindful of it, it's a matter of feeling that energy state of the body as fully as possible. So it's giving up all resistance to it. And so much of our suffering with classically negative emotions is the result of contracting around them and resisting them, and then thinking about how we can get out of this situation and being motivated to be by them. And all that's a way of trying to get rid of the emotion or discharge it in some way. Whereas mindfulness is really just a totally accepting mode of attention. And it's in that acceptance that you can notice that the half-life of these emotions is very, very short. It's impossible to stay angry for more than, tens of seconds at a time, unless you get lost in thought again about the reasons why you should be angry. And so it's really, you're breaking the spell of identification with thought. You're getting out of the story you're telling yourself about your experience, about, in this case, why you have every reason to be angry, and just feeling the raw sensation, the raw physiology of it. And it's in a willingness to just feel it that you can notice how quickly it dissipates. But the crucial thing is that you're not feeling it in order to get rid of it, because that's surreptitiously not accepting it, and bringing in, a kind of resistance to it. Mindfulness really requires that you just become interested in and accepting of whatever is appearing in your mind or in your body in that moment. So it really is you've solved your problem even before the negative emotion dissipates, right? It's a state of freedom even before that physiology changes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Annaka, do you have anything to add to that?
I was just going to add, for people who are new to this concept or new to this practice, or just becoming interested in meditating, or just or attempting it, just to note that practice, especially in the beginning, is something that you practice for, short periods of time, and is not required in every moment of your life. And this is something that beginners and more experienced people can get stuck in, especially when we start thinking about the philosophy of it, because obviously there's a usefulness to anger, there's a usefulness to anxiety, depending on the circumstance. We worry about our kids. There are all these things emotions that we feel that are useful. And when we get into this practice, we can start to resist it, because we think, well, but it's useful here, and what about here? And it's not so much about applying it in every moment of your life, but just developing a practice that is something that most human beings never do, of sitting down for 5 or 10 minutes or longer, if you're able to, and watching the process. And as you practice it, it's like practicing anything else, like an instrument or a sport. You naturally get better at it, and it starts to seep into your life in kind of a more natural way. But I guess I just wanted to put the note of not putting too much pressure on kind of the global idea of what mindfulness is, or what meditation is, that especially in the beginning, you're doing it for small periods of time. And you're not expected to be able to do this in every moment of your life. And the truth is, for someone like me who's been practicing for 20 years now, I still can't live the way I still can't live in some ideal way where I'm mindful all the time.
Yeah, it brings up a good follow-up question in my head, because it's something I've pondered in the past, of what is the difference then between meditation and mindfulness in your eyes?
Well, yeah, so there are various styles of meditation, and so this word names a wider class of activities and uses of attention than mindfulness. Mindfulness is a specific one, though I think it is the most interesting one in the end, because as I said, it admits of any possible experience, right? It's compatible with anything else you could be doing, right? So once you know how to practice mindfulness, this practice can emerge in the midst of your life with whatever you're doing, in the midst of a conversation, while you're exercising, while you're trying to fall asleep, whatever it is. And the reason why this is the case is that you're not adding anything to your experience strategically as a practice. It's not an artifice of any kind. You're just noticing what you notice in each moment, and you spent your life noticing things, right? You notice the way you feel, you notice a sound, you notice a sight, you notice how it feels to move your body. You go from a sitting position to a standing position. You're constantly sensing and perceiving things, but for most of us, most of the time, we're lost in thought while we do all that, right? We're going through our lives having an unacknowledged conversation with ourselves. And the reason why that feels so lousy so much of the time is because the character of the conversation is often so unhappy. And it also, because we're rehearsing our anxieties about the future and our regrets about the past. And we're not really making satisfying contact with the present moment because it's being experienced through this white noise of discursivity. And so mindfulness is a way of noticing that process, noticing that thoughts are continually arising, but from a position of having kind of dropped back into this prior field of just awareness. And but awareness admits of everything in your life. And mindfulness really is, in the end, it's not even a practice. I mean, in the beginning, it seems like one because you're very deliberately paying attention, to the breath in the beginning, and then to sounds, and then you're opening it up to the rest of experience. But ultimately, it's just the state of not being distracted by thought. And so it becomes it can become, Annaka's right, there's no reason to put pressure on yourself or to have unrealistic expectations about how often you're going to be experiencing this certainly in the beginning. And also, this is not to acknowledge, not to ignore that there are many moments in life where a negative emotion like anger or anxiety is appropriate to feel, right? It's a salient signal. It's information about the world, and there might be something to respond to in the world, right? So, but mindfulness eventually becomes just a recognition of the character of experience from the point of view of not reacting to experience and not being lost in thought about experience, and that it becomes compatible with every other moment in life. And a very palpable relief of psychological suffering in all those moments in which it actually does come online. But there are many other styles of meditation, but most of them require that you strategically pay attention to something specific that you might be adding to your experience, like a mantra, say, right? And those practices can be very useful, but it's not quite the same fundamental. The truth is, mindfulness is a kind of negative practice. I mean, what you're ceasing to do something in the end. You're not actually doing something. You're just ceasing to be lost in thought.
Yeah, or you're replacing it with something new to focus on, like a mantra, right? There was a great
that's the difference. With a mantra, you're actually adding something, and then it comes with for many people, it comes with the concern of why am I adding this to my, what is it, why is this in Sanskrit? Why do I have to be a Hindu to be interested in this? Right. So it's like there's a cultural layer to many meditation practices, whereas mindfulness, though it is technically a Buddhist practice, it really is perfectly designed for export into a secular conversation, or it can be embraced by a person in any religious context, because you're not praying to anything, you're not visualizing anything, you're not taking on the iconography of an Eastern religion. You're really just paying attention. That's it. So it's almost like a very generic physical exercise in that sense, in that it has no cultural content. It's like a pull-up, right? And it doesn't matter what culture you came from, a pull-up is a good exercise. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like an attentional version of that. So
Yeah. So you've talked about attention and what we focus on, right? It's in this day and age, I feel like so many of us, we even almost honor and celebrate multitasking, which is just highly distractive, but when people say they're proud of the fact that I can multitask, and are we really multitasking, or are we just,
not so well.
So there's a lot of things, and I'm 100% guilty of inhaling food and actually not remembering how it tastes at all. Rather than mindfully eating and tasting and feeling, having the experience of eating. I think that's something that I really love to do when I'm really, really busy, that, I just have a mindful meal, and it takes, 10 minutes, but the first time I did it, it was really hard. Within like the first 30 seconds, I was already drifting off, thinking about lists, and then bringing the awareness to say it's okay to have those thoughts and not to freak out then that you're not doing it right. It's that's part of it, is to, I'm having this thought. Okay, now back to the food. So it's a very interesting way to lead life for sure. Do you think, both of you, obviously your parents, so has your perception of mindfulness and your maybe practice of mindfulness changed over the years, both as parents, but also, Sam, I know you started at some point, you were working with the Dalai Lama and on the security detail, which is crazy because it's the opposite of mindfulness. You're always thinking about, I feel like, the forward, like what could go wrong, right?
And then that was only for a month, though. I did. That was not a major chapter in my career. That was a month in France.
Okay.
In what has to be one of the weirder jobs on earth, being a bodyguard for the Dalai Lama, because, as you say, he comes into the room, and his job is really just to beam compassion and love and good vibes to everyone. And it's your job to be the paranoid bastard who's just looking for threats. and it's really, there's really no good way to do that job, because there are threats, and it's totally rational to be paranoid. He had lots of security concerns at that point. And when you're, so I don't recommend the job. He's fantastic, but that's a bad way to be with him.
Yeah. But did those experiences sort of impact your practice or your perspectives on mindfulness?
Well, I think I'll hand the parenting question to Annaka, given that she does much more of it than I do. And
actually, this is related to one thing that I wanted to say when you asked the question about the difference between meditation and mindfulness. And this is probably not a technical distinction, but for me, meditation is really the sitting down and practicing and intentional training of mindfulness. And mindfulness is a type of meditation practice, but especially the way it's used now in our culture. And there is kind of a distinction between two experiences: one of sitting down and really training yourself. It's an exercise in training your mind. And that I think of when I teach children, and when I do it myself, it's a more formal practice of sitting down and taking the time to just do that in that moment.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? Because for everyone else, Annaka has the most incredible resources for kids, meditations and so on and so forth. And a lot of it's available for free. So we'll send you links to everything, because they're made for kids, I think, but they're equally good for parents. I use them with my kids, and so we'll definitely share some links for that. Sorry, Annaka, keep going.
No, that's okay. As that reminds me, when we were chatting offline before we started, I mentioned that I often felt that the teachers were getting at least as much out of my meditation classes for the kids, because the classroom teachers, when I would go into classrooms to volunteer, the classroom teachers were always there as well. And so they would get the benefit of learning to practice meditation as well. So yes, so the sitting down and actually practicing and training your mind in an intentional way, I think of as meditation, and mindfulness being more when the benefits of that training show up in your everyday life, when you notice that you're paying more attention to your present moment experience, that you're less reactive, that when an emotion comes up, before you immediately respond to it or have behavior associated with it, there's kind of a pause in between the moment the emotion arises and the moment you act on it, or choose not to, which you might. And that's something beautiful to see children learn. I think as a parent, it's the same lesson that I learned teaching children to meditate before I had my own. Well, I could answer this a few different ways, but thinking of the fact that we're with so many teachers right now, I would say that doing mindfulness practices with children was actually a really wonderful practice for myself. And so I got a lot out of sitting with children and doing mindfulness practices with them. And so I think it is actually a great way for teachers who are interested in the practice to do it with children as a way of beginning to practice themselves. But the other thing that I saw in the classroom, and I could see for teachers, and of course parents have this as well, just the overwhelm of the number of things you are keeping track of in any given moment, between the actual physical circumstance and the physical safety and the emotions and the interactions between the children. And talk about multitasking. That's a situation where there's just so much going on, and the potential for getting overwhelmed in each moment, I think, is so much higher than in most other circumstances. And so I found it to be incredibly useful. And my practice really changed after I had children, because I was busier, and so I couldn't sit for an hour anymore on my own. And that practice went away 14 years ago when I had my first child. So learning to practice when I was with them is a very different type of practice, and it is training for being mindful throughout your everyday life.
Yeah, maybe that's why mindfulness is somewhat almost easier to practice than mindfulness when you're with kids and you're chaotic. There's so much going on because you can actually do it at any time, right? What do you think the benefits are? Like, obviously, there's countless things. Apparently, it's it cures cancer. It does all sorts of amazing things. It's good for depression. It's like, if you go online, if you ask Google, there's like 1,000,001 things that it fixes. But I think, in the era of misinformation, I thought maybe I'd ask you guys who are probably a little bit better equipped to answer that question.
Yeah, well, as you may know, over waking up, I tend not to trumpet the scientific claims about the benefits. My background's in neuroscience. It would be natural for me to just be trotting out that literature. But that's not really the point of contact with science that I find most interesting for the practice. There are thousands and thousands of studies at this point on mindfulness of varying qualities, and many of them suggest that it's good for a lot of things, right? So it's good for your immune system. It may stave off cortical thinning. It reduces stress. It increases focus. There's all kinds of benefits that people hear about, and many of them appear to be experimentally validated. But even if all of that washed out, I would still have all of my reasons to practice mindfulness. Right? And so it's an analogy I've made before. It's like it's just to look at a list of benefits like that and say these are the reasons to practice mindfulness really is a failure to connect with just how profound a change in one's life comes when you actually know the difference between being lost in thought and not. And the analogy, it's not a great analogy, but it gets at the profundity of the difference. Take a practice like reading, right? I mean, the difference between being illiterate and being able to read is so enormous, right? There's such a comprehensive difference in a person's life. It would be very strange to ask whether or not reading reduces stress or whether it's good for your immune system, right? Or it's like if you came up with a narrow list of these benefits, and maybe you could for reading, it's not even making contact with just how important reading is, and the difference between being illiterate and read. It's such a global change in the character of one's life. And there is something to that analogy. Obviously mindfulness is very different than reading as a act of cognition, but it's just yes, even if it proves that it doesn't do anything for your immune system, although there are those studies, that's all of my reasons to practice mindfulness still exist, and the real point of contact with science is that it reveals features of the mind and a character to awareness that puts us in much closer, or puts our direct experience into much closer register with what we have every reason to believe the mind is like, based on a study of the brain. And this comes to some of the more esoteric claims you hear about coming from Buddhism in particular. Things like that the self is a construct, that the ego is not what it appears, and it may be even appropriate to describe it as an illusion. There's no place in the brain for an ego to be hiding, right? That there's the idea that there's an unchanging self that is carried through from one moment to the next doesn't make any neuroanatomical sense or neurophysiological sense. And as you mature in the practice of mindfulness, you begin to experience your mind very much in that way, that there is no unchanging self moment to moment. And this is, that can sound scary or strange when it's described in those terms, but it's actually quite a relief. There's a profound relief that comes in relaxing one's hold on identity in the usual way. And so, but that is really a very direct point of contact with the science, because it does make experience seem much more like what we understand, from studying the brain, and that's what I tend to emphasize.
Can I backtrack just a little bit? You mentioned the
Sure.
self and how it's an illusion and so forth. So for some of our listeners tonight, our teachers, they may not know your prior work with respect to this, but Annaka, I think you did a phenomenal job also in your book, and Sam, you talk about it a lot too in your podcast, and also in your book. But the concept of consciousness and self and what that means. And I know there's a lot of different philosophers who have talked about whether it's the zombie, or whether it's what something is like, what is it like to be a bat, for example. Annaka, maybe you can take first sort of stab at like explaining this, because I'll admit, Sam, I heard you a couple times explaining it, and I was just so new to it all. It was way over my head. Yeah. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so when I read Annaka's book, I went, now I understand. Okay, this is great. I mean, you two are some of the most, I think, the two most smartest people that I know. So I think it's easy to be overwhelmed with this very new information for some people. So Annaka, maybe you can explain a little bit about what that really means.
I can try. I'm afraid I might be as confusing. So I guess I can start with consciousness, and then move to the self. And you can guide me here a little bit, Nadine, if I'm not quite sure what area your audience is most interested in, but just in terms of something that I find, and so many people find, mysterious and awe-inspiring, and something that kind of puts us in a place that's actually very similar to the place we can experience when we're meditating or practicing mindfulness, and for a similar reason, because we're really exploring consciousness. We're exploring what our conscious experience is when we're meditating or when we're practicing mindfulness. And so consciousness, in the most fundamental sense, so people use the word consciousness to talk about complex thought or self-awareness or kind of high level complex brain functioning and human behavior. But the thing I'm referencing is is consciousness in the most basic sense. And it's really just the fact that we have a felt experience. And so there's debate among neuroscientists around whether something like something as simple as a worm is conscious, but it's not that hard to imagine that a worm could be conscious. And if it is, it's obviously not having thoughts. It's not aware of itself. It's not doing any kind of complex decision making. But if it feels anything, if it feels like something to be that worm, to move through the dirt, to move toward something that's a nutrient or away from, some kind of chemical that's dangerous, if there's any, just a few sensations that come to that worm, it's the fact that there's a felt experience at all. That is what I'm referring to when I use the word consciousness, and what I think is so mysterious and such a beautiful fact of our existence, and something that we all share, and that we share with children, and that we're all, here, whatever is true about the physical reality, we're all having this experience, or having an experience of some kind.
So it's the lights on concept, right? That the lights are on, right?
Yes, that's the title of my podcast that's coming out.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
good. I know it was going to be the title.
Plugged it without knowing.
There you go. But you talk about it.
But it's a natural title, because yes, that's it.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And the fact that we are, when it comes down to the physical reality, we are all made of the same substances. We're all made of the same atoms. We all, they were stars that exploded some billions of years ago. And after some period of time, somehow they got arranged in this configuration, and we're here. And at some point, those atoms get organized in a way that the atoms themselves begin to feel something. They begin to have an experience of being those atoms. And so that is what consciousness is. That's what we're exploring in meditation. And part of what Sam was talking about in terms of realizing that the feeling of being kind of a solid self, a solid center, that we all have this intuition that we are, part of the relief of realizing that that's not the way reality is truly structured is that the feeling of being a self has all kinds of obvious benefits, but there are many drawbacks. And one is that it is the way we feel separate from the world. It's the way we feel separate from each other. I'm myself over here and you're over there. And I, there's some sense in which I'm alone. And when you can start to notice the brain processes, as just the experience of them, and feeling this sense of ego and sense of self drop out, there's naturally a connection, not only to other people, but kind of to the universe in general, which is why people words like spirituality to describe that experience.
I think what was interesting is, Sam, when I first heard you talk about it, I thought, oh yeah, totally. I totally understand what consciousness is and so on and so forth. But I think when we, listened a little bit more, and some of the questions and intuitions that, you guys started to question, for example, can a pen have consciousness, or can, for example, a robot, an artificial intelligence, or, there's a lot of, surely we can write code that observes certain things and creates some kind of, the emotes some way, but like, can it really emote, or is it just the outcomes of feelings, right? That's being programmed. It's possibly, the outcomes, not. So there are a lot of things that just started, lights came on for me, and a lot of things that I started to question. For example, a worm, if it has its own consciousness, will it lose their consciousness if it's inside of me? Or can there be consciousness, lots of different types of consciousness in the same vessel, in the same body? So it was fascinating to me, and I went way down a rabbit hole, and have many late night, as we're going to sleep, conversations that I'm now trying to have with my husband. So thank you so much for that. But I'd love you to take a moment. I know, Sam, you've been pretty outspoken about AI. What's your take on AI? I know it's filling classrooms a lot. People seem to think it's the answer to a lot of problems with, not having the resources, not having enough teachers around, and so on and so forth. Where do you see, in something that's as relational as learning, right? Where do you see the role of AI?
Well, I think it poses some challenges for us just in figuring out how to integrate it into our lives without breaking things we care about, right? So it's just the narrow and very limited case that has come up recently in response to Chat GPT is how do you assess student competence at writing, when any student can just produce an essay facilitated by a chatbot now that is basically as good as any seventh grader was going to write anyway, and it's not plagiarism technically, because these words have never been produced before, and now you're going to need some kind of AI to detect Chat GPT plagiarism, presumably, and so maybe people will move to in-class assessments where it won't be a matter of homework, but you'll have to write everything in person by hand, perhaps. So pedagogically, it poses some challenges. But when we step back, I think ultimately it's a much deeper question than how we use these tools, because in the limit, we're going to produce something that is not just a narrow artificial intelligence, but a general one, and that really is that is the end zone that to which all of this is headed. And in principle, there's no reason why we won't reach it, because there's very little you have to assume to expect that one day we will be in the presence of a machine that has every bit of all of the competences we notice in ourselves, but at a superhuman level, right? And this is generally called superintelligence now in the field, and we have superintelligence with respect to narrow AI now. I mean, your phone is a better calculator than any human is, and it's also a better chess player than any human is, and there's an increasing list of competences that AI is conquering. But in the general case, when you have something that is passing the Turing test, it is you can have a conversation with Siri that is indistinguishable from a conversation with a human being. Once that change occurs, on some level, we're never going back, right? It's just like with chess. Once a computer became the best chess player on Earth, from that day forward, there was never going to be a time when a human becomes the best chess player once again, right? I mean that's gone, right? There's just there's every reason to expect that that's going to be true of every other aspect of cognition we care about, provided there's nothing magical about having a computer made of meat, which I don't think there's any reason to think there is. So, which is to say that provided intelligence is ultimately substrate independent, right? You can create in silicon all of the necessary information processing characteristics to give you every form of intelligence that's on the menu. There's just no reason to doubt that at this point. So it is just a matter, on the assumption that we just continue to make progress, we will one day be in the presence of artificial intelligence that is superhuman and will offer no place for us to stand where we can say, oh, well, it can't do that yet. Here are the things we really care about that only humans can do. No, that's going to be gone, right? So the question is, what does that mean for us? And there are a few concerns there. One is that it seems conceivable, at least, that there are more ways to create superintelligence that is not aligned with our interests than there are to create superintelligences that are aligned with our interests. Right? When you look at how we behave around things that are dumber than we are, like ants and worms and chickens, and we don't. Part of being more intelligent than them is having a horizon of experience and concerns and interests that they can't even dimly conceive, right? And so we kill and eat chickens, and the chickens have no understanding of what is happening there, right? Presumably. So if we're poised to create machines that are far more intelligent than we are, and that can process information a billion times faster, I mean, it really is. It's hard to exaggerate how weird this could get, and how quickly it could get weird, if in fact we get there. And again, there's just no reason to think we won't eventually get there. I'm not predicting that this is going to happen in 5 years or 10 years, but in 100 years or in 50 years, there's just no reason we're not going to get there, and perhaps get there suddenly. And then you're talking about a machine that can, even if it was just at the level of human intelligence, but was moving a billion times faster, you're talking about a machine that can do the equivalent work of, the smartest people having a conversation for 25,000 years, and it can do that kind of work over the course of hours, right? What would smart people get up to if you lock them in a room for 25,000 years with all the resources of the internet and everything else, and they could run experiments in simulation and all the rest, and they come out of that room 25,000 years later, having developed new interests and new understandings, and you have to talk to these people, but they can do that every hour, right? They can make 25,000 years of progress every hour. That's the kind of mind we will be in relationship to, and I think we ultimately have to view this as a relationship. The most arresting analogy I've heard on this comes from the computer scientist Stuart Russell at Berkeley. And he said, well, just imagine we got an email or a communication from a far off galaxy, which said, people of Earth, we will arrive on your planet in 50 years. Get ready. Right now, that would be, that would be an emergency, right? Because there's no guarantee that 50 years is enough time to get ready for this encounter, right? I mean, we would be thinking about this. Well, that's in some sense the situation we're in. And 50 years is a hypothetical time frame, but most computer scientists, even the people who are skeptical about whether we should be worried about AI alignment at this point, when you ask them to estimate how long they think it's going to take to produce general AI that is, superhumanly intelligent, 50 years is a very conservative estimate, even among the skeptics, right? So it's in some way, the Russell analogy suggests that we're not really having an appropriate emotional response to the developments that we're generating in the field, and so that whole problem interests me. But it's bigger than figuring out how to grade student papers at this point.
Yeah, could it be though that those superhuman computers, I guess, super intelligent computers, could they turn into? I mean, would they ever have consciousness? Would they ever have that awareness? Would they? Do you think?
Yeah, that's an open question. Yeah, I mean, as Annaka said, we don't yet understand how consciousness emerges out of the physics of things. At what level does it emerge, and whether it is just a matter of information processing in complex systems, or if there's some other principle at the level of more fundamental matter that gives rise to it. I mean, it's just not. It hasn't been figured out, and so it really is an open question. But ethically speaking, it's very important, because consciousness is the bright line that separates systems that can suffer from systems that have no experience at all, right? So it matters. If we could build machines that can suffer, that would be a terrible thing to do, and if it's conceivable we could just stumble into doing that if we're just building, if consciousness comes along for the ride at a certain level of complexity, and we keep building more and more complex machines, well, then we could inadvertently build conscious machines. And perhaps more interesting than that, or as interesting as that is, we're certainly going to build machines that seem conscious to us, right? Because we're going to build them that way. They're going to talk to us. That if they're humanoid robots, eventually we'll get out of the uncanny valley, and they'll be displaying facial expressions that don't seem weird to us anymore. They'll really look, it'll be like the show Westworld, right? You'll feel like you're in the presence of another being, whether or not you are. Right. That's the another interesting question, whether we might just lose sight of this problem ethically and intellectually because we'll be so powerfully taken in by the spectacle of being in the presence of machines that seem conscious. And whether or not at that point we know that they are or not. Yeah.
That's crazy. It's we could be like the chickens or like a Terminator 3. Who knows? I'm going to open the floor up just a couple. If anyone has any questions, please either put them in the chat or just put up your hand, or I guess just speak, whatever works. Otherwise, I'm going to just continue on. But I just wanted to give you guys the option to ask any questions that you have. For me, I know Lisa asked if you could give some examples of meditations, by the way, that you do with a kid. We're going to send links out to the actual resources. So you'll have all of those. It probably will take a little bit of time to otherwise run you through that. But we'll definitely send you links to everything. They're phenomenal, and I highly, highly recommend them. Karen says, how do you suggest that we can have students embrace mindfulness at a young age?
I have found over the years that it's something that they actually take to pretty quickly and easily. I think it's important that the teacher have some level of experience themselves. I mean, it's true of everything, of course. You wouldn't teach violin to a child if you don't know how to play the violin. But it is something that the vast majority of children that I've worked with, and I've gone into preschools and worked in kindergarten through fourth grade, the children, I would say the older they are, the more resistance there is in the beginning. But it doesn't take much time before they just understand, one, what's interesting about it, and two, the benefits of it. I mean, it really was just one of the most rewarding experiences of my life to hear children not only just have interesting experiences in meditation, but say things like, usually when I get in a fight with my brother, I end up hitting him and then I feel bad. And now I notice that I can stop. He notices the anger arise, and he has just that pause that is important enough for him to realize, okay, I'm about to do this thing that doesn't end well. And to have the language and ability to even just see how that process in himself has changed. So, I mean, that's just one example, but I find that children learn more quickly than adults do, learn how to meditate more quickly than adults do. They have less resistance to it. A lot of the things the habits that we form that make it difficult to begin a meditation practice, kids don't yet have those barriers. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm not sure who asked the question and what level of experience they have, but I would say if you're a classroom teacher and you want to introduce it to your classroom, I have all of these are freely available. I have many exercises on my website from the classes that I taught, and then Susan Kaiser Greenland and I put together a deck of cards for teachers for this purpose. And so I would say, do a few yourself and pick your favorite one and bring it into the classroom and do one every few days or when you have time. And I think, it's a fairly natural progression once you bring it in. And the nice thing about it is most of the exercises are don't have to take that long. And yeah, I don't know. Did I answer
Yeah,
that?
no, I think that's right. I think, we just have such there's so many distractions in our daily life. I think just having the ability to, like, even just, social media and just the constant alerts that we get on emails and text messages and so on and so forth, just bringing people's awareness sometimes to sort of say, oh, do you see these distractions? Do you see that it's pulling you? And so just having the awareness of what's really happening.
The children seem to have a sense of relief. I mean, there is something, I think, intrinsically pleasant about taking a moment and just feeling your breathing or noticing what you see in front of you.
They all actually got one of the meditation sound bowls, like in their boxes. So even just, by the way, playing that and having the kids tell you when they stop hearing it.
Yeah, when they hear the sound stop.
Like to have their hands up.
That's a very simple one that I actually do. And when I teach my classes, that's the first one I start with. And in every class thereafter, that's how we begin the class.
Yeah.
And many of them find that to be so beneficial. I'll get emails and texts from parents, that their kids are doing it at home. They just notice that they like how it makes them feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so right. Wonderful. Well,
I should say, Nadine, that waking up is free for anyone who can't afford it. I mean, people just need to send an email saying they need it for free, and they get a free 6 months or a free year, depending, and then they just can repeat that as many times as they want. So, so money should never be the reason why people can't get access to it. And even at a group level, if you have a class, I mean, this is obviously not appropriate for younger kids because they don't have phones, but older kids, in high school or middle school, it's just, there's no reason why students should be paying for it, right? So you just send an email to support@wakingup.com and just ask for it, and you get that. So
that's
I should
really
have said sorry that, because I think I mentioned my website, but all of my meditations for kids are on the Waking Up app as well, so they can.
And you all have 3 months through us, and then as Sam just pointed out, if anyone doesn't know then how to get that, then just let us know. But thank you guys so much for joining us, Sam and Annaka. I really appreciate you coming.
Sure. Yeah.
If everyone else can stay on, we just do a really quick breakout if anyone can. That would be so great. We had Miss Baker say, by the way, that the app has helped a lot. So there you go. Thank you guys again. Have a wonderful
great
evening.
to see you, Nadine.
All right, we'll see you soon.
Take care, everybody.
I want to say thank you to all the teachers too, because you guys are doing some of the most important work right now.
Yeah, you guys are heroes.
Yeah.
I should have asked you this earlier, but really quick before you leave, do you guys have a teacher that was instrumental in your life?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
A few, and a physics teacher actually that I've been trying to find so I can reach out and thank him. It's not as easy now. The kids, I mean, it's not as easy. It's easier now than it was then. To some people just who weren't before we had the internet, they're just not. You can't Google them and find them. Yes, and I think about the teachers who had a big impact on me.
Wonderful,
especially now that we have kids. Yeah.
What about you, Sam?
Although I'm so old that my teachers are expiring, so it's all right. It's too late to Google most of them.
Okay. Well, maybe we can track someone down. All right. Well, thank you guys again. Really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your night. And if all the teachers can just stay on for just a couple minutes, and we'll go into the breakouts really quick. That would be great. Who's the first group?
Okay, I'll go first. Well, and I don't know why my camera's not working, so I apologize. But in our group, we actually had a very nice conversation. We all got to know each other a little bit, and we just talked about really pulling it into all of our classrooms. One of us is a first grade teacher, which is me, and then there was an OT and then a high school teacher as well. So we had a large range of where we were. And we just felt like the importance of it for all of our students is there. And we talked about some different tools to use. And we look forward to seeing some of the tools that you'll be sharing with us as well. So,
okay, cool. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that back. What about anyone else? Can anyone else share what their group talked about? Should I randomly pick people?
I can go.
Okay.
Our group, we really liked some of the quotes that were shared. One of them said, "You're not feeling feelings just to get rid of them." And I feel like I do that very often especially when I'm angry. Emotions are useful. We also really liked emotions only last as long as you let them. And we said that could either be a good thing or a bad thing, and that if they're negative emotions, you could live in that. Or if they're positive emotions, you can keep that going for the rest of your day. And we said somebody said, we're going through our lives having unconscious conversations with ourselves, and most of the time they're negative. So trying to realize when I'm having those negative conversations with myself and trying to stop that and focus on like, hey, I don't need to be negative right now.
Or even just being aware of it, right? And
Yeah.
just like letting it be there and not trying to stop it and say, oh, look, there's that conversation again.
Yeah.
There's that thought pattern.
Then you can see how often it happens.
Mm-hmm. Well, then it usually dissipates, by the way, because it's always when we start to go, oh God, I can't think that, I shouldn't think like that anymore. And then there's all the spiral that goes after, and we all do it. That's helpful. Who else? Julie, do you want to? She's got such a beautiful smiling face.
I was in the group with
Okay.
Guadalupe. So yeah.
Okay.
But it was we had a great conversation.
Okay, good. Irene, what about you? Who were you in the group with?
I was in the group with Karen and Christina,
Okay.
and it was wonderful to be talking to people from Maine and Rhode Island, and I'm in Southern California. And so, we were the ones with the different grade levels, and I got some really good sources, and we talked about that. And I must say, we did talk about weather.
It's all good. How did everyone feel about the AI conversation? Was that something that was interesting to you as well? I think a lot of us have AI in our world, and it's just a fascinating thing. I shared this earlier, just in a smaller group for the first people that came back. But one of the things that Sam talks about is he likens it to ants. And he says, when we're in a pool, we'll fish out the ants and we'll save them. We step over them if we're walking across them on a pavement. We'll go out of our way not to kill them. But if they are suddenly in our baby's nursery, we will absolutely annihilate them. So it's just one of those things where, once the goal is to say, for example, fix global warming, and they realize that actually humans are the issue, there's no reason why they shouldn't then talk to self-driving cars and talk to all the other things that we work with. And it's not so much as, if, then but, and then, also talking about the ethical piece. There's a lot of people who are trying really, really hard to make sure that there's all these safeguards around it. But at the end of the day, it's pretty egotistical of us to think as human beings that we've thought of every outcome. And to not think that at some point someone who's maybe not so well intentioned is going to use it, maybe for weapons of mass destruction and so on and so forth. So there's just, what this will look like in 50 years, 100 years, will be very different than today, but it's definitely something to think about. I found that really fascinating. So, well, I hope you guys got something from tonight. If anyone else has anything to share, please take them in now. Otherwise, I want to give you the rest of your evening. I know we're running a little bit over today. It just was worth it. I was having such a great conversation with Sam, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too, and enjoyed the box and got something out of it. So So next month, don't forget, it's going to be on a Wednesday. So we'll send out the newsletter and all the updates and so forth. We will be announcing who the guest is next month too. We have a very, very special guest. Actually, I might just explain to you now because you guys stayed. So
and don't forget about the date change next month.
Yeah. Yes, I said it's on Wednesday, February 15. So the day after Valentine's Day.
Yeah. I changed it in the ad event, so everyone's calendar should reflect that. If not, I will be sending another email where you can reattempt to add if it's not updating. But it should be.
And our guest actually next month is the CEO of the Deepak Chopra Foundation. So it's Punacha, and he will lead us through a meditation. So we will have some fun next month too. So that's a little sneak peek of who we're going to have next month. So lots of great things happening. So thank you guys again for your time. I wish you nothing but love and energy, good energy, so you're refueled for tomorrow. Thank you again. Bye, guys.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Bye.